let's not forget that because you have four gongs and four hammers. In fact, you have twice as many different little snails and cams and arms and whatever, and all of them have to fall into the right place at the right time and receive the right amount of torque every single time. And the moment something just does not reach quite so far or does not operate fully, then the whole thing can just go bang, basically. If you operate it at the wrong time, or if you try and set the time before, Jaeger sometimes, I think, has this anti-grenade function built into it, in which if you are operating the minute repeater, then you cannot set the time, or maybe it's the other way around while you are setting the time. So if you want to destroy somebody's minute repeater, just try adjusting the time while it's in operation, and it's basically guaranteed to destroy it.
Hey everyone, and welcome to aBlogtoWatch Weekly. I am not Rick. This is Ariel. Rick is not here this week. Our dear captain is off elsewhere, unable to sail the ship, which is the podcast. So we're going to take over in his stead. Just this time around, it won't be the same. We won't have some of the same games and the fun, but we'll go over the news and we'll make the most of it. As always, in addition to myself, is David and Ripley from the aBlogtoWatch team. Gentlemen, how are you? David?
Good, very well. Good morning. We miss you, Rick. We miss you dearly.
David misses you, Rick. Ripley?
I'm good. I'm good. Rick said something cryptic about being in a remote location with no access to internet or power. So I can only imagine that could be anywhere in Scotland. So yeah, I'm curious.
I'm thinking it's the spa. He's getting a day spa massages with the family. There's no reception when you don't have your phone with you. You know that.
He's bringing all of the farm animals, and they're getting a spa day too.
Okay, that's a new kind of weird, but well, maybe. Going back to horology, we have a couple of articles from aBlogtoWatch this week that we're going to chat about. But first, we want to talk about an interesting trend, and the trend is books about watches. When aBlogtoWatch first started in 2007, it was when print media for watches was still relatively strong, and it had a demise because there wasn't much of a demand for it, and people seem to really prefer more immediate hands-on content about watches online, which is why aBlogtoWatch has remained so popular. But there's been a resurgence in decorative, mostly coffee table sized books about watches, about brands. There seems to be a lot more of it lately. Guys, I think the first question is, do you agree that the watch book trend is a trend? David?
It is a newfound love and affection for some, for sure, and I don't just mean readers, but also publishers and writers, which is great. I think it used to be a thing at all times, but we saw this dip, I think, like 10 years ago when blogs were like really shooting up and forums and whatnot. And it's also interesting to see that some of the brands who used to not publish official books, like Rolex, for example, or not so often, are coming back with them. So that's pretty cool to see.
Ripley, what do you think?
Oh, definitely. And it's not just the big brands where you'd expect them to create a book that costs 1/10 of a fraction of a tax of their watches. It's it seems to be all types of brands, but I'm cultivating a small library of various watch books, and some of them range from very, very expensive luxury brands all the way down to the budget friendly fan favorite Japanese manufacturers.
There's two types of books when you want to look at it in terms of quality, and some of them are books that I guess are informative, and those that really aren't. The ones that aren't maybe populated with pretty pictures and have a nice design, and maybe are designed to look good on a shelf. Once you open it, you realize there's not much substance, there's not much to learn. It's as though the people writing the book don't really have any relationship to the company. There's not much of a story to tell. At the end of the spectrum are books that are quite academic. In certain actually rare instances, original photography is taken. The book that I did for Casio G-Shock, their 40th anniversary, that had original photography of the watches, which actually made it quite rare. And so there's a classification of books that are useful. I guess the question I want you guys to answer is, what types of books do you think are genuinely useful for collectors? Which ones do you want to own and to keep? And which ones do you think will have information that if people look into it, they're going to learn something, want to know? They'll be better off if collectors for it. David?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just got this book from Breitling, which is for 140th anniversary of the brand, and it says 140 stories, and I think that's kind of cool because it's not just here's all the dates and years, and Willy Breitling was maybe 19 or potentially 20 when he took over the, not stuff like that, but more like actual stories and just the performances done by the by different Breitling watches in space or wherever. So I think something like that resonates a little bit more. And I would also urge brands to not be so self-aggrandizing. I took one of these, I think it was, one of the branded books, and I just opened it at random spot. I do this with all kinds of books, and just to see what I found and what draws my eye for the first time. And it was just this thick glazing of self-praise and whatever. And I wouldn't want to read that for 400 pages, right? So just take it easy, and as long as it's like that and it's informative in a way that is not just superlatives left and right, I think they will make for a good reading.
Ripley, what do you think?
Yeah, I think kind of David hit it on the head. It should, the point of a book, or the advantage of a book versus something more short form or web based, is that you really can go give a deep dive into an area that just wouldn't necessarily be conducive to reading, in a digital medium. So give us some additional information, the good, the bad, but just the stuff that's not going to be just like necessarily on the brand's website. And, the worst thing that a brand can do in making a book is making a 400-page advertisement. So, it doesn't need to be just like the greatest hits in the brand's accomplishments. It can be some of the stories, the trials, the tribulations, just some of the intertwined things that just breathe life into their catalog and heritage. But, it should just be the stuff that you wouldn't expect to see in the marketing materials. A glorified long form advertisement isn't what anyone really wants, unless they're just really, really big fans of the brand. And then in that case, they already know this information, so that it really doesn't give any value to anyone.
How popular do you think these books are commercially? Obviously, a lot of brands make them and give them out. We get them as members of the media. VIP customers might get them. Various other people might get them. Some of them are available in stores where people can buy them. And I do know for a fact that simply because of the distribution of my watch books, it's a very interesting range of types of stores that have it. So I'm just wondering, how big do you guys think the market is for people to want to buy these books to add to their collection, whether it's to show off or to learn?
I think they have a twofold purpose. I mean, there's the commercial viability, which, I think they're a relatively niche product, but I think they're also a really great way for brands to steep existing customers further in their history and get them more excited about the brand and buy more watches. So I think while the revenue stream from the purchases themselves is certainly an objective, I think it really is only part of the equation where, they're not just selling these to super fans of the brands or the curious collector. I think they really are also a tool that allows brands to sort of pull people further into their world and, teach them about it. And I think that also is why we see that urge to just have all that self-aggrandizing language and full of superlatives, where they want to convince people that they're awesome. But realistically speaking, if they're reading a book about the brand, they probably like them enough to begin with. So, it doesn't really need to be that inflated.
It's really hard to get around that. You have to think about the two scenarios that lead to these books. One, a brand itself pays for its production 100%, and they're not really going to allow for negative things to be said, even if they're not actively trying to, whitewash themselves. And the second instance is a publisher. It was a niche publisher, because there's not a lot of publishers actively investing in these books. And unless they want to spend huge amounts of money to buy watches or a lot of resources to get their hands on watches through independent owners, they have to work with the brand, and that cooperation is necessary. So again, it goes back to access. So the two most common scenarios to getting these books written are ones that just naturally lend themselves to brands wanting to have more control. I have a recent book here as an example for looking closely at sort of how these things are made. So this is the Submariner book. the Oyster Perpetual Submariner. I love how they add that in there. Well, I guess because, outside of the watch world, Submariner means lots of other things. The Watch That Unlocked the Deep, written by colleague and good writer Nick Folks, who's written a lot of books, who's been on my Superlative interview show, who is a good character. Interestingly, here you look here, it's basically published by Wallpaper, that used to be a magazine, is now kind of call them an agency. And you have the official Rolex name on there. So Rolex actually validated this. I'm not going to sort of open all the pages here, but I skimmed through it. There's a lot of original text, I believe. I didn't see a lot of original photography, but of course Rolex has enormous archives. But essentially what this is, and I think it's interesting just to look at it for what it is yes, it's marketing, absolutely marketing. But it tries to capture a story that, if it wasn't in this consolidated form in the book, would be sort of difficult, right? Like if you're a collector of the Submariner, you want to know its history. Rolex probably has the most trusted, maybe not the most complete, but the most trusted history of it. And the alternative to this is to read like thousands of articles, on aBlogtoWatch and elsewhere, to try to gobble up bits and pieces. It's not really that efficient unless you actively want to pursue, the lifestyle of being a collector. So these books, if they do their job properly, can convey a story. And as we all know, it's that story which gets us emotionally involved with these products. And outside of that, we aren't necessarily going to care. And we know the differences. Like there's be two great watches. One, we know the story of the other. I don't know anything about that. We just don't care about one of them. So a book like the Oyster Perpetual Submariner tells a story that's real, that's gone back since 1953, I think is the first one. And, there's all kinds of pictures about how Rolex water tests and some of the schematics that Ripley was talking about the crown lock system. It's got a bunch of historical pictures of like divers, commercial divers doing dangerous stuff and with grainy photography, all the old ads. It's got a lot of good stuff that sort of gets you excited by it. So I think they serve a purpose. I don't know the market for a book like this as opposed to it serving as a marketing tool. But I think it's an interesting thing. We'll see where it goes. It's fun because it's something else for us to have to show that we're enthusiasts without necessarily being a watch. And so in the scheme of home or office decor, all of us and our friends and colleagues, we like the watch books, right? David?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's let's not forget that this is marketing material. So your first question was how successful these are commercially, and I think brands can judge it by how successful any of their marketing material is. It's just that in this case they're in the lucky situation in which the consumer of the marketing messaging is paying for it, for the privilege to consume said material. So that's interesting. On the other hand, to Rolex's, I mean, we have to note that Rolex does not really provide letters of authenticity or certificates of authenticity. So it's extremely difficult to get any form of information out of Rolex on a specific matter that you are researching. Maybe they will cover that in the next Rolex magazine, and maybe they will never speak of it in the next 100 years. So for them to provide a selection of material that goes or that spans hundreds of pages, I think some of us will definitely jump on this and see what is it that we can find, any leads that allow us to dig any deeper elsewhere in archives and whatever. So it's extremely rare for Rolex to acknowledge its history in such depth, and for that reason I look forward to them publishing other books on the rest of the collections, the Daytona, the Datejust, the Day-Date. It would be so cool to have all these books next to one another, and I really hope that Nick is already working on all the rest of them, basically.
Yeah, I'll take a deeper dive into that book, and I'll actually have Nick back on the show to talk just about this. So this is being a briefer. Anything that we want to see in the watch books, I, of course, would like to see more publishers invest in them, meaning they hire a writer and they make a book without it being paid for by a brand in advance. That would figure out one of the problems that you mentioned about them being basically marketing material. They would be a little bit more commercially minded. It also would lead to a little bit more experimentation. I'm sick of hearing the history of a model or a bunch of, stories about a brand or the history of a brand or how amazing the founder was, Franz Jesus over here started the greatest watchmaker since biblical times.
Under a very different name 200 years before we called it what it is today. Never mind.
So, it's kind of interesting to see. So I want to see more of that. What about you guys?
Yeah, I want to see more of that as well. And like David mentioned, I want to see the brands who traditionally don't really confirm, deny, speak to the in-depth stuff that people want to know about it. And Rolex has been doing this more and more lately, so I want to see that continue. And I also want to see the other brands that have been notoriously tight-lipped about certain aspects of their history or production to sort of use books as a way to kind of shed some light on it. And then, like you mentioned, on the other side, for all of the stuff that isn't coming from the brand directly, have the publishers invest in it and be able to create something that's really unique and different than the type of book that the brand would create for themselves.
Well, we'll take a look a year or two from now and see where we're at with books, if it was a temporary fad or there's going to be more of these. And yeah, we'd like to hear from all of you. However you like to give feedback to the show, if there's particular watch books that you like or watch books you'd like to see. Only Rick has the WhatsApp number. Maybe we have to have like a little flashing thing on the screen. See number on screen.
He's been promising a jingle with bagpipes, and we have yet to hear it. So this is just a hollow promise.
It's a tall ask.
This is like the tag isograph. It was set into the wild but never materialized. I want to see this come to fruition. I want the bagpipes. I want the 47-digit string of numbers. I want to hear it.
I just thought, wasn't podcast at aBlogtoWatch.com email address? Wasn't that easier?
So elegant, so simple.
That? Yeah.
We have that. It already exists. Yes.
Oh, okay.
That's been around for a while. Gentlemen, ladies, you can email podcast.
Yes, podcast. All we're doing is emulating the watch industry. We had a perfectly viable solution, and we created a super complex alternate solution to the same problem. So, we're just doing exactly what we see. Life mirrors art,
Is this how companies like Meta are actively making our lives more complicated?
100%.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I just met a guy who spent 10 years, maybe more, at Google, and the stories he told me, I'm not going to repeat now, but maybe.
Well, thanks for the tease, David. Really,
it's as bad as you think it is. I've been thinking about, like, I was sitting there like, that sounds exactly like any of the big brands, basically.
The one thing I want to know is, what was the week like at Google when they officially abandoned the "Don't be evil" statement? They officially took it out of their, I don't know, their slogan at one point. And I want to know
I think it was like a 90-minute long meeting, and when half of the people have logged off, somebody was like, "We are abandoning, but don't be evil." And then that was it.
Yeah, like there's no way they could do it quietly, right? They had to announce it. But like, that was a long time. It was very reassuring because I was living in San Francisco at the time when "Don't be evil" was an official part of their thing. It was written into their, I don't know, not their bylaws, but it was a written statement.
Yeah. I have a new pet peeve of mine, which is to say that I really don't like it when something is said in a double negative, basically. So they didn't say "we are nice"; they just said "don't be evil." And that's so annoying. I mean, they didn't say like, "Oh, we are nice after all," or "we are the angels of search," or "don't be evil." And that I think as a coder,
it's easier in their mind, right? Because being nice is very vague. I don't know how to code for that, but evil seems to have a set of rules that if you violate them, you become evil. So they're basically saying, don't violate any of those rules we generally agree would make you evil. But then they were like, wait a minute, that's not how money's made. Speaking of money being made, let's talk about some watches. Oh, Ripley, you had more thoughts.
No more thoughts. I'm just sure that was one of those things where it was like, well, we've given that up. I guess now we have a whole frontier of possibilities. It's like if a brand were to be like, we spent our history trying to provide good value for the money, and we moved up market to become a luxury brand. So what was $3,000 will become $6,000 next year, and by by 3 years from now, we'll have a $12,000 time-only watch. So I feel like, once they gave up that, it's all bets are off. Go forth and conquer, and evil is subjective anyway, so I'm sure they'll find a happy medium.
There is definitely something evil happening in watch brand pricing right now. It's not infected all brands and all models, but something evil is in the wind. And that's another theme I guess we can talk about next time. But something to keep in mind is we always talk about the sort of, we gloss by the unaffordable price in a lot of the watches. I also, that's something where you can find our WhatsApp number or email us and let us know what you think about watch prices right now. It's not all bad, I'm sure. Let's get on with some hands-on. One of the interesting partnerships to have been announced a while ago and now further elaborated upon is the Breitling NFL, American football connection. They just partner with the full-on NFL. These are just some of the watches. I think that there's one per team. I embarrassingly don't even know how many teams there are because I'm that poor of a fan. It's got NFL in the back. You can see that there's different dials here that have the team colors and the little logo there. And these are nearing $10,000. They're pretty watches. The Chronomat is definitely a handsome timepiece. For many years, American football was like the one sport that watch brands were afraid to fully integrate with. Like they would do niche rugby full on. NFL, we don't understand about that. Hublot, I believe, was the first one to do anything, and it was with some players, and they did a couple of teams as well, some stadiums. Breitling is not first, but definitely not late to the game because there haven't been that many. And they've done things like hockey, and they've done, a lot of different types of stuff like that. So thoughts in general on Breitling and the National Football League?
I mean, from other brands, this would be $13K. So for 9,200 to get a Rouleau bracelet, an in-house chronograph, one of the best ones out there, and such a beautifully made case and dial, again, from other brands, this is normally way past. Which I mentioned this a couple of times a few months ago that we just blasted through the 10,000 barrier, and watches that used to be 9 are now not 10 or 11, but like 12 or 13. So this at 9.2, I think is actually really competitive in its own segment. It's a lot of money, but you get a truly bespoke bracelet and a beautiful movement and all the rest of it. So it's quite a competitive package, but I really don't understand how these logos and these colorways were chosen for the Chronomat. I don't get it why the Chronomat is carrying all this
team colors, David.
Nonsense. Yeah, but why this collection? Why not something else?
Well, because all of them are now $8 or $9 grand because they've got the BO1. The Top Time used to be the affordable collection that they would let be the fun collaboration watch for $5-6 grand. But once it got a BO1, it's like $8-9 grand. So it's a small bump up to the Chronomat, and they already did the classic cars series for the Top Time. So it makes sense it gets the Chronomat, but it is rather expensive for what's ultimately like a piece of like team-based swag that someone can wear at games or whatever, so there's 32 NFL teams. And that's a lot of different Chronomats. I think the Chronomat itself is a great watch. I'm a big fan of the current generation Chronomat, but with 32 different iterations, some of these are going to be probably made in pretty small numbers because it's some NFL team that like not even the people in the city who live there care about. And then others are probably going to be pretty popular because they're, a popular team. But again, it's a lot of money to pay for what's like the rich dude equivalent of a jersey. And in the same way that like when a sneaker company makes every single colorway for all the NBA teams into a pair of sneakers, like those end up at outlets because there's just way too many different options. Some of them are good looking, some of them are ugly, but that's the colors of the team, so be it. Some of them are so identical to each other that you can barely even tell them apart. And with 32 NFL teams, I love that they're catering to literally every single NFL fan who has $9,000 to spend on a thematic watch. But at the same time, like, I wonder who's going to buy some of these. And that at the other time, I only imagine some of these are going to be a Chrono 24 for a fraction of the price because you're looking for someone who wants a Chronomat at $9,000 and is a big Steelers fan and who prefers the Pittsburgh Steelers Chronomat over the regular standard production model. So they're a little bit confusing just because of how expensive they are, but I like them in concept, and I love that Breitling's like really leaned into the NFL thing and is doing something. I know we keep saying about the price, but doing something more accessible than that like solid rose gold piece they did for the Super Bowl, which is, it's an awesome watch, but so priced so outside the realm of what like the average NFL fan can pick up for themselves.
Yeah, it's an easy watch to pick apart in some ways, but I think it's easy to also overlook all the stuff it does right. From the Breitling perspective, I mean, look, there's one case, there's one movement, there's two straps. There's one strap and one bracelet, so there's two attachment options. There's a couple of different color seconds hands, and there's some different dials, right? So really their big investment was with relatively inexpensive stuff because they can kit the stuff out and build them as they need, right? They're not making thousands of each one right away. The first ones are of course going out to what? Managers, players, stuff like that, and they chose the model they like, which is, the Chronomat. It's probably their sexiest mainstream watch right now. It still is. It's aging very, very nicely. So I think that's where this came from. They just didn't want a top time. They didn't want, a quartz watch. They're like, we want one of these, and I think that makes sense. The retailers who will get them first are those in the towns where those teams are, right? So they'll get little bits and pieces of it. They won't have to make a bunch, but Arizona will get some of the Cardinals, in Philly they'll have some of the Eagles, and they'll see how it is. It'll be something that Breitling can make a bunch of, just have them and trickle them out over the years as fans like it, or there's special awards and things like that. The team probably ends up buying a lot of them as it is. I bet that there's a lot of that going on. So I think there's a lot of nuances that actually make it practical. What I also like is that, let's say here I'm looking at the Minnesota Vikings here with this sort of purple and yellow. What if you just like those colors? Aside from it saying NFL on the back and having, honestly, a relatively small graphical logo there for the team, which on your wrist isn't look that big, you like don't really need to be a fan. You just like, oh, that's a cool little logo there. I mean, hey, if we like Snoopy on a dial of something that has nothing to do with Snoopy, it's not that big of a deal, right? So I think that there's a case to be made that there'll be people out there that just find this is cool, because as Ripley pointed out, there's over 30 of these. This increases this page is not available. Great. This increases the visual variety of chronomats out there, which means the fashionistas will be like, oh, it's just my special color. The Miami Dolphins one. Look, I don't have any attached from the Miami Dolphins, but that's a pretty looking watch right there. I could see myself liking that. That's just a cool thing. But it's not going to be for everyone. Someone else might like something a bit more conservative. Look at them. A lot of them are just black dials with silver subdials. Like, that's clearly what a lot of them are. That seems to be a popular one. So I think that they went relatively subdued, and they're trying to see what the market is like. And if you're a fancy watch retailer in Seattle and you have a Seattle Seahawks watch, it feels like, oh my God, the luxury watch industry cares about my city. Like, I can see that getting someone inspired to buy something. All right, rant over.
Well, what I like that the Chronomat's being used for a lot of these collaborations, because despite it originally being a Chronomat for mathematicians, and then kind of it's now exists as like the Breitling's multi-purpose sports watch. So it kind of makes sense that if they're doing something sports related that isn't a performance, like wear the watch while you're doing the sport, like the Endurance Pro, the Super Ocean's the diver, the Top Time's kind of that vintage inspired one. The Navitimer is the pilot's watch. So the Chronomat really is kind of the organic, multi-purpose sports chronograph, and you can even get it in time-only or GMT model. So I like that they're using it now for the different collaborations, whether it's like the Giannis Antetokounmpo version, the GMT, or this. It feels like an organic fit for the modern Chronomat collection, and I like that for it. I don't know if I like it $9,000, but I do like it for the collection.
Are the football players able to wear watches?
No.
I know that certain sports. Okay, no.
Yeah,
I didn't
so
think so.
there
So
was
none
a
of this
whole
on the
thing.
field.
There was a whole thing with Odell Beckham Jr. Who's wearing like an RM in a couple of them, but it's ultimately deemed a hazard for players. So because of sharp metal and whatnot.
Yes,
And
the sport with armor considers something a hazard.
well, and in F1, for all of the times we see the F1 drivers with them, they can't actually wear them while they're racing. So there's literally a podium after the race with like their team hat and their watch and whatever accoutrement they're supposed to wear during the interviews that they immediately put on after.
Yeah, they
before
just stick on. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen that.
so
I've seen that.
yeah, I it's not the watch that you wear while playing football, but it's definitely a good piece to put on, in the post-game interview. And the cool thing about the price point of these is for anyone who gets drafted to one of these teams, it's not outside the range of like what you could buy with your first NFL contract. That'd be an irresponsible purchase. So it'd be a great way of celebrating your first team without like blowing half your first year salary on, the thing to commemorate it with.
Absolutely. Let's move on. This is an interesting watch if you really think about it. This is the another collaboration between Marathon, which is we typically see as like the ultimate tool watch maker, collaboration with Jeep, which is a tool style car. I think the Marathon's a better watch than the Jeep is a car, but that's a whole other conversation. There's definitely a huge fan following behind the Jeep. They took their officer style case, which is a really cool, gorgeous design, and they made it a little bit bigger. So it's 41 millimeters now. They created a dial, which isn't half bad looking, put in a manually wound Salida movement with a special cliquet that make it just sound a little bit louder so you can really hear it when you're manually winding it. There's also a quartz version, which is a relatively high performance quartz movement that looks almost identical, which is like, I think, under $700. This one is $650. The other one is like, I think, $200 less actually. There's also of course, the G-Star version of the Jeep one, but I wanted to sort of focus on this one. I don't think it's the watch for everyone, but it's sort of better than the Jeep people needed, right? David?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I quite like. I can't get over this clunky case. I think it's so hilarious that someone out there. I mean, this is a niche. Sooner or later, someone had to do a case that basically looked like as though it was just stamped with like one oversized machine that goes like dun dun, and then
but that was the whole point. Case. These were supposed to be mass-produced military watches. Originally, they were much smaller.
Exactly. So it just shines through. Yeah, I absolutely love it for that. I mean, it's just throws my eyes. Basically, I think it's a cool concept. It carries the Jeep. I branding pretty well. I wish that the car was as rugged as this watch looks. Sometimes I feel like there's a lot of extra plastic bits and pieces that would, I think, fall off if you took them to a forest or something. But not this watch.
Ripley, what do you think?
I like this one. I think this is a case that really works better in the smaller size, but I've got smaller wrists. But I do like this case a lot. I think the dial's good looking. I think it's kind of, reminiscent of like, the tack or like the speedometer on a car, but not to the 2 on the nose point where it becomes a little ridiculous. I don't personally have a giant affinity for Jeep, so I almost wish this was devoid of the co-branding because I think it's just a pretty good looking, interesting watch that isn't like a lot of other field watches. But I all things considered, if you said, hey, there's a Jeep collaboration watch, I'd say, oh, please, no, thank you. But no, honestly, I think these came out pretty well, and Marathon makes a good watch at the end of the day. So all the little things are done right, like the quartz movements they use, or that like high-end ETA one with like all the rugged, tough features and all of that. I think it's cool that it's manually wound so that you can keep it nice and thin. So I think it does so much right. It's not for me because I don't love Jeep, but it does feel like a natural partnership for the brand, given they both have the military heritage and all of that.
I feel that the price point is almost at an unfortunate middle ground because it's like not too expensive. It's too expensive for like maybe the Jeep person, but also not expensive enough for a lot of watch enthusiasts to be like, oh, that sounds like it's right up my alley. Like, even though it is a real enthusiast grade watch, don't you think that people will be like, mechanical 650? No, I can't take that seriously.
No, I think it's okay. I think you're getting a Marathon after all, not like a freaking fashion watch. So I think it's right in between. I agree with the assessment, but I think it could work.
I think
what do you think about how Marathon did the? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the mechanical one's a really solid value proposition. I can see the people kind of balking at a quartz price that's like 400 and change. That's more. I mean, that's kind of more or less where the navigators are, the composite case ones. But when you look at a lot of other Swiss mechanical watches, that sort of $600-700 range is where a lot of the value for the money is. Like, think Tissot PRX. A lot of like just standard Solita watches are kind of in that same nook. And the fact that it's not just the standard like SW200 type of deal, it's a manual wind one. I think it gives it a little bit of something else that kind of makes it almost good value for the money relative to some of the other pieces in their catalog.
The last thing I want to ask is, what do you think about the way Marathon integrated their name? Having two brands on a dial is very challenging to do. If they both are given equal weight, it's quite awkward because you're like, I don't understand this. Here, Jeep was given obviously the priority. Marathon almost looks like part of the technical description. I thought this was quite clever. What do you guys think?
Amazing. I love it. It's very, very cool. It's co-signed, but co-signed in a way where they put themselves into the second place. You will hardly ever see that from one of the bigger brands, but I quite like it very much. It reminds me a little bit of military watches that are co-signed, or basically like whoever made them was secondary. Basically, it is all about function and whatever. And sure, there's another brand here, but I would love to see this a little bit more often.
Ripley?
Yeah, I like it as well. Because it keeps it a Jeep watch, and then keeping the Marathon where you'd almost see like a depth rating or something. Like the specs of the watch it's almost like Jeep watch made by Marathon. And I like that they allowed themselves to take that secondary role and sort of keep the emphasis on the collaboration itself rather than making it the Marathon Jeep watch. It's the Jeep Marathon watch.
Very good. Moving on to an interesting watch that I got to see a little bit. Mike from the team reviewed it. This is an Andersen Genève watch. This is sort of like a collaboration, but this is a watch that is part of the serial production of Sven Andersen in Geneva. It is a world timer. I just found it so nicely done. It's not for everyone. It's again, this one has a very specific kind of painted dial with these balloons over this landscape. But I want to know your guys' opinion on something like this. It's not even 38 millimeters wide. It's got a crown that is sort of inset into there. It's kind of actually a little bit difficult to pull out, but not too difficult. It's meant to be elegant. Very finely polished. Again, this to me is really the epitome of an enthusiast watch. Really about technique. The lugs especially are in beautiful shape. Very few people who are not enthusiasts would understand why anybody quite cares about this, but enamel painted dial, movement, really, really nicely decorated movement, aging platform. It's a 3 hertz movement, but it's got this beautiful guilloche automatic rotor, and everything is done really nicely here. This watch would cost so much more if it was like a Patek Philippe. It's just under 60,000 Swiss francs. Yeah. So this is a limited edition of 20 with this particular BCHH collaboration with Andersen Genève. But again, there's other versions of this. I was really, really impressed by this, and I was really happy to see that Andersen Genève is keeping these types of really artisanal watches alive. And hey, guys, any thoughts?
Big fan of those lugs. I think that's a great shape. And I mean, like, if you really just want to appreciate sort of the art, the craftsmanship, the complication, I think this is a fantastic alternative. And unlike a Patek World Timer, you're probably not going to spot another one of these out in the wild. So it's a compelling purchase in that realm, because obviously this isn't the watch for mass market appeal, but I think it's a really lovely piece, and it does so many things right for what's ultimately a pretty reasonable price for something of this ilk.
Yeah, this watch, the full name is the Andersen Genève with BCHH Celestial Voyager Sunset over Cappadocia. So you can check that out on the website. Well, a watch that I didn't think Omega was going to come out with came out, and we don't spend that much time talking about Omega right now because, frankly, I don't really take that much interest in a lot of their new stuff. this is one where I made an exception. It is not pretty, but it is cool. It's essentially a C version of the, was the X33, the Z33, the Skywalker, all the crazy names it's had recently. This is a regatta timer, which means it's designed to help you during boat races. One of the criticisms was that it's not extremely water resistant, even though it has a Seamaster style dial, and is what it is. It's titanium. It's got a ana-digi dial, which I think is I like these. I've always liked high-end ana-digi dials. There's also a little moon phase indicator on there. I mean, they're really searching for their inner G-Shock. I mean, more so than ever. I mean, this is the best G-Shock Omega's ever made.
I mean, this is G-Shock money sometimes. I mean, you can spend this much on a G-Shock today, which was unimaginable 10 years ago.
Yeah,
it's $7,400, and you can easily spend over $5,000 on a freaking G-Shock today, which is kind of crazy. This got a lot of heat in the comments for it not being a pretty watch. I can certainly see why people are saying that, but I do disagree at the same time, in the sense that I would wear this. I think it has this 80s over-designed, over-styled charm to it, with truckloads of information and just a lot of indications and whatever, but not in an annoying way. I really don't like watches that have literally 400 little notches everywhere, or way too many numbers and stuff like that. And this is really close to doing that, but there's enough variety between numbers and notches and hour markers and whatever else on displays for it to work for me. But again, I understand that this is not, by the back of the hand, a beautiful watch. Engineering has clearly gone a lot into this. I feel like I had this Breitling B55. There's a link to the review of that in this article about the Omega. I used to own that, and I feel like this is giving me the same vibes where Omega and Breitling have these very highly specialized movement and watch engineers who love to work on stuff like this, super dorky stuff. With 70-page manuals that are extremely difficult to burn through and to memorize, and yet there's a lot of work that has gone into assuring that those 5 people who get one of these will be able to use these to design. And I think in other ways, mechanical watches are a lot like that, and for this reason, this watch resonates with me.
Ripley, what do you think?
It's profoundly ugly, but it's cool. And so I think there's like that distinction. There's a lot of cool things that are just objectively not pretty, and this is certainly one of them. I think that it's a really cool looking piece, but oh my God, is it ugly. And it looks colossally thick too, and just a chunky piece. But again, it's a cool piece. I actually really love these weird ani-digi watches that Omega makes, because it's like Omega, who's now just a full-on luxury brand, really, really trying to make themselves just feel like a Rolex, a Cartier of the world. It's them still saying, but remember, we made tool watches, and now we still do. Of course, they try to say the Seamaster and the Speedmaster and the Moonwatch. It's still good for NASA, but like, I love that they still do these, because it's actually Omega making a real tool watch that's super, super specialized, like solely for astronauts. So the Mars timer, no one needs that, but like, it's awesome that they make it. This thing, exactly this thing, I love that they still make these, because unless it's your daily watch or you have a photographic memory, you're going to need to reference the manual every time you replace the battery and need to sort it out again. But I love that they still do these, because it's so not the Swiss approach these days in watchmaking, but it really is sort of pushing the boundaries of a modern tool watch in a really elevated manner, rather than, the $400 like Gravity Master or something like that from G-Shock that sort of does the same thing, but really is the more proletariat version of the tool watch.
I think what I like about it is it kind of looks like a toy, in the sense it's got all these buttons and things that you kind of want to play with. And that's kind of been the hallmark for me of a cool watch, is that, you want to engage with it. And you see the first thing a lot of people do with the watch is they just unscrew the crown and start twisting it for really no reason. And this watch, I'm like, oh my God, can I make it beep? What can I do to make it beep? Right? And
you can definitely make it beep. You might not figure out how to make it stop beeping, and you could definitely do something to screw up sometimes or set some alarms.
Sign me up.
It almost looks like
I
the
do.
American Power Ranger morphing thing. You know what I mean? It's so big and like cartoony, and it almost looks like a Gundam style thing. You know, it looks like
Well,
almost anime.
we had a design exercise over the last couple of years of what if Swatch made an Omega. Maybe this is what if Omega made a Swatch. I really think that's what we're looking at here. Okay, something basically like that. The size of it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. The Japanese have proven time and time again the power of miniaturization technology. There doesn't seem to be anything here that requires all of this space. This watch is nearly 47 millimeters wide, and I don't think that counts the flanks and a lot of the other stuff going on here. It's almost 16 millimeters thick. It's not going to be that heavy because it's titanium, but and we're not going to figure that in this conversation. But I don't quite see why it's so big. It just doesn't really need to be. It's not a smartwatch. There's no giant battery in there that I understand. So that's one thing. But otherwise, I think we've all agreed that we're happy Omega made this. I don't think any of us are excited to actually have to use it for its variety of purposes. We hope that it's just someone set the time and date and boom, we don't have to deal with it for a while. That's the thing. I look forward to wearing one of these. Omega, no matter how image conscious they are today, I really love that they're not stopping their history of making some profoundly unaesthetically appealing timepieces. From, I don't know what it was. It was quite early on in their long storied history. Maybe it was the 60s or 70s, but especially in the 80s, they started making some watches of true questionability in the design front. And they're keeping that heritage alive and well. It's giving us so much to talk about now and into the future. What does this watch cost? Somebody remember? Oh, here we go. $7,400. Quite the G-Shock.
Still less expensive than the current gen moon watch.
Well, that's a hard sell.
Let's move on. Also from the Swatch Group, at a completely other side of the spectrum of practicality, is a new version of the Hamilton Murph. For those who don't remember, the Murph was the nickname of a prop watch from a character related to a character named Murph in the Interstellar movie. Hamilton made a Frankenstein watch out of some parts that ended up looking quite nice for the movie. There was like a kind of a Morse code thing being communicated through the timepiece. And I remember sitting with Sylvain Dalla at the time, who was the CEO. He's now at Tissot, at the movie premiere, and we were like, he was showing me the prototype. I'm sorry, not the prototype, the prop with this little cord coming out of the back. It was just, it was a whole electronic thing. I was like, why don't you make these? He's like, I don't know about that. They end up making them. They do really, really well. I mean, Interstellar came out like a decade ago, I think, right? These are still selling well. Now they have a 38 millimeter version of it with a white dial and also a black dial. I think that there's maybe a bracelet version as well. Under $1,000, 38 millimeters is usually considered a pretty good size for the Khaki. Attractive looking timepiece. Any particular thoughts on the curious, enduring popularity of the Murph, as well as these particular new models?
I mean, it's just a great watch that you could wear around. It doesn't really say anything to those who are not into watches, and I think it's just a solid combination of of vintage design in terms of the cathedral hands and those numbers, but with a modern case. I really don't. I'm not happy about the loss of the Eureka seconds hand that is present on the larger versions. It's as Jamie here points out, you used to get that on these limited edition watches or these inspired editions, and it used to have the word Eureka in Morse code in loom on the seconds hand, and that's just such a cool little detail. And I mean, it's a likable watch, but let's be honest, it needs all the help it can get to be a little bit more charming and fun. And those little loomed pips on the second hand were just it. And sadly, it's not present on the larger one. Oh, sorry, this smaller one.
Yeah, I was really sad to see that go because, we always say when a brand makes like the movie watch for the public, don't make the gift shop merch version, like make the watch from the movie. And like, this is almost so, like look at the Hamilton Dune watches. Like they didn't make the thing from the movie. They made 2 watches inspired by the thing from the movie that were really just Ventura's. Like this, they didn't have a watch for the movie. They made a watch for the movie. They didn't really have plans to make the watch for the people. The people said, that thing you made in the movie is really cool and we want it. And then they made it. And it was such a success that now it exists in 2 sizes, multiple dial colors, and it's sort of transcended its role in Interstellar, and now is just sort of this like vintage inspired field watch thing they have. And I think the removal of that loom Morse code on the seconds hand is sort of marking its transition out of being the Interstellar watch and now just being this kind of core collection offering. But like David said, I'm sad to see that go. It was that one little touch that made it different. And if when explaining why this is different than any khaki field mechanical type of thing, you could point to that and talk about the role in Interstellar and shine a little black light on it. And it was that fun little novelty that just really set it apart. But I think this is sort of a turning point for the Murph, because it's now really not the Interstellar watch. You can get a different size and a different dial color. It's now just this thing that Dick Hamilton makes. But I think that's a really interesting aspect of its history.
You're right. It's become a fashion watch, not in a bad way. It's just become fashionable. I think the good news is that the Murph watch that we are all talking about liking, Hamilton has made plenty of, right? So that watch that we like, which is the authentic replica of the movie watch that has this the loom on the seconds hand, that's basically Morse code for Eureka, like that all exists. We are just now lamenting that these new versions have, as you said, shed the movie souvenir novelty kind of element to it, have a heritage to that, and it becomes sort of a slightly different thing. But at the end of the day, for people that just want a good looking field style watch, it's pretty handsome. Okay. That's the 38 millimeter version of the Hamilton Khaki Field Murph, and you can see more about that on aBlogtoWatch. We have both a hands-on article and actually a sponsor post, so you can hear about it from Hamilton and hear about it from us. Moving to a completely different spectrum again. I almost want to play guess the price here, because this really could go all over the price. But this is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Hybris Artistica Calibre 184. I don't know if this movement is per se brand new. I think it's just a new execution. It's got the gyro tourbillon, so we know it's got that. Does this one have
Westminster chime minute repeater? Yes, sir.
Yeah, it does have a minute repeater. I was like, yes. Where are the gongs?
Not
I
just
see the limiter
Westminster
right
chime.
here.
Westminster chime. It's got a perpetual calendar. It's got
there's the gongs.
Enamel work. It's got lacquer work. This isn't a new watch per se, but it's just the artistic rendition of one. They made this before, but with a more open work dial. I believe it was in white gold. Largely blue. Now you get like the black and gold version. So it's got these additional plates that are enameled. It's got these lacquer decorative things on the side, and it's just kind of the more artsy, embellished version. But oh yes, it has quite a cornucopia of some pretty high level complications.
Movement has over 1,000 pieces, which is several times more pieces than most movements.
Oh, wow. I was going to say that, I have very serious doubts whether or not this is actually a functioning thing. I have basically no doubt, very little in fact, that it would survive 5 consecutive operations, maybe 10, before it goes like boing,
what do you think would break first? The minute repeater, perpetual calendar, or the gyro tourbillon? What's the most fragile element there, we think?
I would put the gyro tourbillon to the last, because they've added it to a bunch of watches before, and it's been around for well over 10 years, maybe 15.
But it's still the newest of the complications in the scheme of things.
No, they have the helio tourbillon. But the gyro tourbillon rock solid. It's only got 2 perpendicular axes. It's definitely the Westminster chime minute repeater. So unlike a regular minute repeater that uses 2 hammers, for like the minutes and the quarters, low notes, high notes, the Westminster chime needs 4 hammers to play that little pattern of it. So you've got like 4 times the metal on metal contact of one repeater hammer You've got 4 of those, and they're vertically mounted on these, kind of on either side to hit the black finish gongs. And they're right next to the gyro tourbillon. So if there's any type of metal debris coming off of after repeated use, it is definitely going into the most intricate part of the entire movement.
Everywhere. And also, let's not forget that because you have 4 gongs and 4 hammers, in fact, you have twice as many different little snails and cams and arms and whatever, and all of them have to fall into the right place at the right time and receive the right amount of torque every single time. And the moment something just does not reach quite so far or does not operate fully, then the whole thing can just go bang, basically. If you operate it at the wrong time, or if you try and set the time before it, Jaeger sometimes, I think, has this anti-grenade function built into it, in which if you are operating the minute repeater, then you cannot set the time, or maybe it's the other way around while you are setting the time. So if you want to destroy somebody's minute repeater, just try adjusting the time while it's in operation, and it's basically guaranteed to destroy it. But again, I think the point here is that these are extremely fragile things, and I just don't really understand why you would want to have all of these functions in the same watch at the same time, when in fact I don't think we've ever seen one of these constructions appear or prove to be reliable.
David, have you never wanted to have the coolest watch in your country? I think that's your problem.
Yeah.
You just simply didn't want to have the most fancy, complicated watch in your region of the planet.
Oligarch timer. That's
Yeah.
great. The oligraph.
That answers most of your questions, by the way. Why does it, despite how tasteful this, why does it have to say Westminster? Okay, like we hate the shameless labeling. It happens on cars. It stopped a long time ago. Watches still do. Watches are labeled as though people are buying them in the display case while walking by. Oh, 3 days, and the others don't say 3 days. I'm gonna get that one. Like, now this watch, nobody is ever buying this watch by seeing it walking by a display case. So it'd be like, Westminster. Okay, I was looking for that feature.
It's so ugly. It looks like it looks like a soap in a hotel. Basically, it's just additional branding that you don't need and makes no difference. The case spec says 5 bar in like really
you guys
large
are missing
text
the
on it.
point
So you
of
have
the
those-
Westminster branding. It's so necessary because, as David mentioned, you have about 4 or 5 operations before it destroys itself by activating the minute repeater. So short of playing the Westminster chime and having those 4 hammers strike the gongs, how are they going to know just by looking at it that it is in fact a Westminster chime minute repeater if it doesn't say Westminster on it? You'd otherwise have to play it, and then that you've used up like 20-25% of your total number of plays before the next service interval.
There should be like a counter that counts down the number of operations before it is most likely to break.
I was just going to say, this is not actually your counter. This is the number of days until the thing breaks.
Well, it is funny that they fitted it with a perpetual calendar, as if you're not going to have this in before, like, the next leap year or something like that.
Can you imagine wearing? That's an excellent point, because for perpetual to make sense, you would have to wear it or keep it wound all the time. The chances of this watch being in operation 365 days or most of the year is basically 0. Let's be honest.
And if you do, it's going back to being serviced all the time.
There's
So
no escape.
it's this weird catch-22. You either ignore a complication while you're wearing it altogether, or you subject it to completely needless wear and tear.
That's hilarious.
What's an oligarch to do?
Oh my god.
Well,
Just not care?
without the 5 to 10 year service plan, which you're inevitably going to want with this thing, I'm just going to round up $1 million for the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Hybris Artistica Calibre 184 with all the fancy decoration, which could fractal Eiffel Tower nightmare. I don't know what to call that.
But it's there.
It's there. So look, it's cool. It's not my favorite of the Hybris Artistica watches from Jaeger, but I'm glad that they're doing this stuff. And once again, it's $1 million, and you'll get to know your watchmaker on a first name basis. Moving on, we can play one of our Seiko Guess the Price games. I really don't know where this is going to be. I will just have to basically scroll down. This is the Seiko Presage Craftsmanship Series, Urushi Lacquer dial, reference SPB 447. Basically, this is a design I think we know. This is the Presage with the black Urushi and the sort of gold accents. But the twist here, of course, is the GMT movement. On the dial, it says Presage automatic 3 days GMT, just in case you ever forgot what it was that was going on underneath the dial there. I guess, yeah. What do we think it costs, David?
$850.
Okay, Ripley.
Well, I wrote the article, and
you know.
I
Okay.
know exactly what it is,
That's
and
right. Should have
I
seen you wrote
was
it. Your name's right there.
considering where King Seiko's at, I was pleasantly surprised by the positioning of this one, and I think this is kind of draws attention to the fact that there exists quite a lot of I think the Presage lineup is kind of eating the King Seiko's lunch. Yes, this King Seiko has a better movement, technically speaking. You get a higher frequency. It's a thinner design. You get a shorter power reserve, so 3 hertz in this one instead of 4, but you do get a GMT. So when you look at this compared to the King Seiko, you get a hand-finished Urushi lacquer dial. You get a GMT complication. It runs at a lower frequency, and it's got, therefore, wider timekeeping tolerances. But you get a 3-day power reserve instead of about 2 days. But then you get to the price point of this versus the King Seiko models, and that's where things get a bit wonky. I know what it is, but Ariel, do you want to take a guess?
Okay. Yeah, I don't think David's too far off, but I'm leaning towards a bit higher, so I'm going to say $1,250.
Well,
And
you're both far under
We're
it.
both
It's
way-
$1,750, but
oh god, I was a little bit closer.
So it's not cheap, but it's also like half the price of the most recently announced King Seiko models, which kind of puts
But
into
King Seiko
perspective.
doesn't make sense.
Which it
That's
puts
not a
into
good
perspective
bar.
how
That's not a
expensive
good
they are.
reference point. Yes.
Yeah, like this to me.
In that sense, that's true.
If you put
What's
a
that
slightly,
Urushi dial got to add? Like, is that like $300?
well, apparently they're
Oh.
hand finished with under painstaking care under the supervision of some master, lacquer
They are.
artist.
But we've seen some of these Urushi dials be really reasonably priced. That's why I went low, because I think I've seen them at much lower price points.
It was
I
the
think what-
movement that really pulled
Yes,
my
the
attention
3-day.
down. That's what I
Exactly.
thought. A 3 hertz. I thought this was going to be a budget movement. Like, oh look, but it has some, we'll call them artisanal features. So I figured around $1,000, maybe a little bit more, but pushing 2,000. I mean, this is a thick watch, right? It's not thin. I mean, just look at the stacking of the hands. I haven't seen this one in person here, but there's a picture here from an angle. Yeah, you can see like this dial itself is pretty tall. It's going to be legible, but it's not going to be an elegant thin watch. I think that's what the King Seikos have going for them, is they're significantly thinner, which is, I believe, part of the point. I remember the majority of these watches were well under $1,000. So that's pushing it up a little bit. Is this a limited edition, Ripley?
I don't believe so, but it's Seiko. They, with X number of watches entering the catalog, I can't imagine they're gonna just make this one indefinitely.
It's a pretty watch. It has a case which is simply made. It's a bit thick, and while the movement is a good performer for what it is, and there's just not a lot of GMTs like this. Yeah, it's an interesting trade-off. It's genuinely pretty, but it's definitely not on that higher echelon of what we know Seiko's doing right now. Okay, well, that is the Seiko Presage Craftsmanship Series Urushi Lacquer Dial SPB 447. You can see more about it on the aBlogtoWatch.com website. Last thing we're going to talk about today is my essay. This was written for a mainstream as well as the enthusiasts, and it was called What to Expect After Buying a Luxury Wristwatch. I wrote this because I was told that there's a lot of people on social media promising you what you'll feel after buying that Grail watch or after buying that Rolex or whatever it is. And I said, aBlogtoWatch needs to have a definitive statement on what to expect for everyone. Hopefully they'll find it. Apparently some of the forums have picked this up. And so I won't, of course, reiterate everything, but I'll mention the major bullet points here of what I said are the main things to expect. And the feedback's been pretty good. I love your guys' thoughts. So the first thing that you to come to expect is you'll fall more or less in love with the watch. And I basically meant to say that you end up liking it more, or potentially you might not like it as much as you originally thought you were and it would, and that's normal. Again, something that we have been trying to reiterate over and over and over again, and now finally the other media is starting to catch up. Don't expect your watch to perform like a financial investment. Do not buy a watch thinking it's going to increase in price to resell it again. This is not something that you should expect is an outcome after you buy a watch. So don't go in with that mentality. Not often talked about, but important, especially for novices. You'll need safe places to store or carry them, whether it's a place to keep it safe from prying eyes, or if you're moving it around and traveling with it. It can be kind of complicated to get the right system where you can store enough watches. It's not too bulky. The watches don't scratch when you're in it. Do you need compact space? Is that more important? Do you need shock resistance and drop resistance? Do you want to have its own container that has a handle on it that you carry around, or do you want to throw it in another bag? These are all important considerations. And I think everyone that is a watch enthusiast will say you got to have a place to store them, and you got to have ways of moving them around. Some of us take lots of watches around, 5, 10, 20 at a time. And there's ways of doing that. So, store your watches properly. Brands and stores you buy from will want to get to know you. And this is the expected thing, especially if you buy from an authorized dealer or a brand boutique. They're going to want to invite you to events, see if you want to spend more money, see what you like, see what to invite you to. Yes, it's marketing, but actually it's part of the benefit is being the guest of a luxury brand's hospitality. And if you're a good client, they'll show you a good time. They'll invite you to some exclusive things, and they might even take you on trips. So that's actually a good thing, assuming you're that kind of a spender. But in any event, you want to get to know the people that are selling you watches. Trading it for something else is possible. You're not married to a watch you don't like. If you bought it to sell it for more money, you may have a problem. But if you just don't want it anymore, I guarantee you somebody else out there will. And you can either do a peer-to-peer transaction or go through a dealer, but don't think about selling it. Think about trying to trade it for another watch or credit towards a watch or something like that. Your money can go further that way if you just sort of get sick of it, rather than trying to sell it and then using that money to make a subsequent purchase. Very important advice that I had to learn quite early on myself is other people might not notice your watch, and that's okay. Some of us put so much anticipation in a watch that we want, and we imagine, oh, it's going to be so great when other people see this cool thing on me, and that happens sometimes where people do notice it, and other times they don't. And so don't expect other people to notice it. They might notice the watches that you don't really care about, and that's what they notice. And so it's kind of funny the way it is when it comes to people complimenting watches. It's not always the ones you want complimented, but the watch, should be for you. And finally, it will inspire you to collect more watches. One good watch deserves another. It's really about the journey of acquiring, sampling the variety, exploring your tastes, learning the history of watches through wearing, different iconic models and things like that. There's no one watch collection to rule them all. There's no done watch collection. There's just getting as much as you can afford or have time to hunt for. So those are the things that I wrote about that I thought people need to expect or think about expecting after buying a luxury wristwatch. Any additional thoughts or observations, guys? David?
It's interesting. I think people have an extremely high, or assign an extremely high priority to resale value, and I certainly understand that buying a toy essentially for 5, 10, 15, 25, however many thousands, or even a couple thousand, wherever your limit of comfort is and budget is. They say that, of course, they would prefer to see some of that money again if they get bored with that purchase, or they grow to not like it, or whatever. But I also feel like I would rather spend half as much as my limit is and get something I genuinely like. Because the overall wearing and ownership experience is not affected at all by how much you spend at, the day of purchase and how much you get it for it when you're selling it. That's at the beginning and the end. But in between, you're wearing, and I see this a lot, I see people wearing watches that they don't really like, they don't really care about, they don't know much about at all. Of course, that's a different topic, but I think part of this discussion anyway. And they just got it because, oh, I can still sell it for more, or maybe get what I paid for it. And I would rather spend money that I'm not seeing ever again, any of it, and get something that I genuinely like, than buy something that gives me absolutely zero wearing pleasure. And most of those watches, sadly, that have a good resale value, a lot of them are boring as hell and very generic and do very little in the way of giving you a good look into the positive experiences that you can get when you are owning and rocking a watch that you actually like.
Thank you, David. Ripley, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the resale thing is always just so interesting how for some people, it's arguably more important than buying something they like. And I think I see this a lot where someone buys a watch either because they thought it was a good investment, or like they were pretty neutral on the design itself, but there was a lot of hype for the watch and they thought they could probably make some money if they wanted to get rid of it later on. And that was sort of the way they talked themselves into buying this thing that they weren't absolutely into themselves. But I think like when you buy a watch, once you own it, you're going to pretty quickly figure out for yourself whether you bought it because you really liked it or because you got caught up in the hype or the resale value or something. Because once you have it, unless it's something where you're just going to make a killing by flipping it, it's kind of a hassle to sell if it's not, something you're really motivated to do and need that money. And then, like Ariel said, you're either going to fall more or less in love with it. And often the times when you fall less in love with it, and it's not because of a shortcoming in the watch itself, it's probably because you didn't buy it for the right reasons. You heard a lot of hype, you heard good things, it was hot, and you figured, you had the opportunity to buy it. But I think there's always kind of that realization, that personal reflection, where sometimes you get a watch and you're like, yeah, this thing's awesome. I'm glad I picked this up. And there's other times where you're like, yeah, this thing's overrated. Like, David had that with the moon swatch. It's like, this was fun. The novelty wore off and, I'm over it, and I think that's kind of it both. It's both reflective of how well the watch delivers for what it's supposed to do, but it also, I think, is reflective of, why you bought the watch, and did you buy it for the reasons that are sort of genuine to your preferences, or for all of the other intangible stuff that often influences people's purchasing decisions.
I want to make an additional comment on that topic of watches, investments, and resale value. It's changed a little bit over the last couple of years. What I've identified now as being the core mentality is less about I'm going to sell my watch and make money, and more a worry that I'm going to lose money. What if I need to liquidate it? What if I need to get my cash back? How difficult will it be to sell? And what type of price will I get compared to the retail price? I'm starting to see that as being more of a concern. And there's two elements to that. One is that does mean that people are a lot more price sensitive, but I think that's actually a function of more people being into watches. Watches have, as long as any of us have known it, a rich person's hobby, right? Yes, there's affordable watches at all levels, but still spending several $100s on a timepiece is a total luxury, let alone, thousands or many thousands of dollars. But the net of awareness is big right now. There's a lot of people into watches who may not be the traditional buyers who can afford all those prices. So they want in, but they're not as comfortable spending those amounts. And as we've been talking about earlier in the show, prices are quite high. So what may have been an uncomfortable $3,000 purchase is now like a pretty serious $9,000 or $10,000 or more investment. And you're like, I really want this. I want to reward myself, but I'm so worried. Like, what happens if I get some crazy bill and I need to sell this thing? And if I lose $4,000, I'm going to be killing myself because I just don't make enough to see that really quickly. And I think that actually represents a much larger percentage of the buyer demographic now than it did several years ago, which has pluses or minuses, but it really demonstrates the larger pool of people that are into watches. Do you guys have any thoughts along those lines?
I think you see it with cars too. you see certain stats about cars about like value retention. And, I think, yeah, like you mentioned, it's not losing money because if they need the money for a medical bill or something, there's that. But then there's also, if they don't really love it and they want to get out of it and get something else, not losing 50-60% right off the top is kind of that natural safety net that will allow them to take that money, buy a different watch, and not feel like they absolutely lost their shirt over it. But I don't think it's just exclusive to watches. You see it in quite a lot of other things once you reach certain values, whether it's a car, vintage synthesizers, high-end speakers, any of that stuff. I think anytime someone's spending a lot of money for something where there is a resale market, people want to just have that liquidity to make themselves feel more comfortable spending that money. So yeah, I think you're completely right. It's an easy way to make people feel more comfortable having money wrapped up in something, or even just sort of taking that first step to spend the money in the first place.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's totally reasonable and prudent to try and not waste a bunch of money and lose half off in the scope of a year or two. So that's, of course, very reasonable and understandable at the same time. But I think it's just become a very strong defining, decision-making factor when it comes to people choosing which watch to buy, as opposed to them thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe I will spend within my comfort zone and not spend 10K on a watch, but spend 1,000 and realize that you can get a lot of fun for $1,000. But I just feel like I just don't really see the point in spending quite so much and then not enjoying it at all. And basically, the biggest deal that you get out of this whole experience is that you got your money back. I think that's just really backwards. And I've been seeing this sort of approach and reality a little bit too often over the last few years.
Well, the reality is the way to get out of that stress that David is mentioning, where you have to worry about the value, is to just buy a cheaper watch. And I think that's where people need to be more open-minded. If you can't afford a few $100s, again, that's understandable. But this hobby basically starts there, right? You need at least a few $100s to get in the hobby. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars all the time. And if you feel that you are overextending, then step back and buy a cheaper watch, because you'll still be happy about it. You won't worry. You'll actually feel better when you don't care what's done with it. If you feel like you can give the watch away when you don't like it anymore, that's the good feeling. Oh, I have a friend or a relative or a child or someone is going to want that watch when I don't want it. If you can feel comfortable getting rid of the watch and completely losing the money when you're done with it, that's the correct state to be in. Ideally, I might be idealistic. I understand that, but that's where you want to aim for. You shouldn't be like, let me find the absolute most I can spend. I'll maximally leverage everything and buy the most expensive watch I can. No, that is not a correct way of doing that. And the basic self-control of this hobby requires knowing what your limits are and sticking to it, and vicariously enjoying those more expensive watches through those wealthier friends that we all hopefully have in this space who can buy those fancy things. We can wear it, we can enjoy it, and then we at the same time enjoy the watches that we can buy without too much worry. Do you guys agree with that wisdom? Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think I 100% agree. And I think also when you're buying a watch that is well within your comfortable price point, you're also never buying it because it's like a Veblen Flex, or like because it's like the super hot thing that you're trying to impress your client with or something like that. You're buying it because you like it and it's cool and it's useful, or whatever other reasons that are genuine to your preferences. But if you're buying a $200 G-Shock because you like the color and it's tough and you can wear it at the beach or whatever, you're buying it for all of the right reasons to begin with. And I think that's why watches like Seiko 5s and G-Shock are enjoyed by a wide variety of collectors, not just people who can't afford Pateks. There's people with giant collections of Patek and Rolex who still buy multiple G-Shocks a year because it's something they don't need to worry about. It's something they can give to someone when they're done. But at the same time, it's completely mental. There's no mental baggage that comes with it. It's just something you can enjoy in a very pure manner.
To check out the full article, go to the aBlogtoWatch website and read the Ariel Thoughts column, What to Expect After Buying a Luxury Wristwatch. This has been aBlogtoWatch Weekly this week. Also listen to my interview show, Superlative. That's the other podcast we do. Next week, our fearless leader, Rick, will hopefully be back, and you'll get to enjoy his hosting skills. Until next time, thank you so much. David, Ripley, any departing thoughts?
I just want for Rick to stay safe in the Scottish wilderness without internet and whatever else there is.
Yeah, I hope wherever Rick is in the remote wilderness location, there is sunshine. But it's Scotland, so there's probably very little chance of that.
He does mention the deficiency of sunlight. It is a tragedy. I'm told to remind everyone to share the show with your friends, as well as to rate it on the respective platforms you prefer to listen and or watch. Thank you for everything, and check out all the latest news on aBlogtoWatch.com. This is Ariel, David, and Ripley saying good night, good morning, good afternoon, and see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.